As a lead artist and writer, he is known for his 3-year run on Wonder Woman in the early 2000s. He has worked on such books as Tempest, the Infinite Crisis series, X-Men, The Amazing Spider-Man, Angela as Guardian's Assassins, and most recently Faith by Valiant Comics. In addition, he teaches figure drawing in the Bachelor's of Fine Arts Cartooning program at the School of Visual Arts. He's also a Scholastic Writing Drawing Awards judge and a mentor for design students at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum. Thank you, Phil, for coming.
Thank you.
So, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today about...
I want to talk to you too.
Oh my God. About your work on Wonder Woman. What was your first introduction to Wonder Woman? What appealed to you most about the character?
So I can answer that, I'll answer that in a little bit. What I would like to do, if this is okay with you for a minute. So this woman has had me here as a guest. I mean, I think most of you are here because of her and the work of her and her friends. So I would actually like to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Because I'm really interested. I'll talk about, as I say, my part of the business later. And it's interesting listening to early panelists. I have some insight that may or may not be helpful. But my first question is, what got you into comic books and sequential storytelling?
Well, when I was a little girl, my father, my brother, they brought me into comics. My brother, we watched The Incredible Hulk, The Great American Hero, Wonder Woman, all that great stuff, Batman 66, all that great stuff. And my father, he would read the Sunday Funnies to me. So comics were just ingrained in me, and I just really enjoyed the stories. And after a while, I started drawing my own characters. I started reading classic X-Men, maybe in about 1989, 1990. And that was my first foray into like mainstream comic book work. And I fell in love. I fell in love with the diversity of it all, especially with X-Men. So I just started drawing these stacks of my little sketchbooks when I was a kid still. Of me drawing characters and have story outlines and the whole 9 yards.
So let me understand. So the stuff that you were watching a lot of TV then, is that right? So what got you into a lot of this was stuff that you were watching on TV, cartoons and live action?
Yes.
I asked because one of the things I'm interested in, particularly when it comes to women, people of color, LGBT people, is where we're first exposed to that imagery, and if it's positive or negative. And I find a lot of people they get into comics either because of their parents or because they see the characters in one medium and want to follow them in another. Going straight to the meat of some stuff. I've been asking people because I'm very, very curious about representation and what that means, and how much that means, in your case, for example, was it important seeing Black women in your work, Black people, any people of color? What was your first entree into the world of someone who looked like you?
It's so interesting because when I first started drawing characters, they were all white.
Your characters?
Yes, they were, every last one of them. I was 9, 8 years old, 10, even up to 15, drawing white characters and not really realizing that that's what I was doing. It wasn't until I actually started writing my own book that it clicked. It's like, well, don't I have characters that look like me? I don't understand. I think I don't get it. And all of a sudden, you become quote unquote woke. All of a sudden, like the light bulb goes off. Like there's something wrong here. There's some brainwashing that was done that I now have to shed. So then I immediately just started going into my own, I guess my childhood and my own background, and started creating characters that look like myself.
Wow, that's kind of amazing. When you wrote and drew their stories, even if they didn't look like you, did they reflect values or ways that you navigated the world? Or were they complete fictions that you just sort of drew from outside your space?
Most of them are complete fictions, but some of them reflected who I was as a person in terms of my values and what I care about. I mean, I like to think that all the characters, even the villains, have a little bit of me in all of them. So somehow, some way, I was still there.
That is so interesting to me. So this group, Women in Comics, the collective, what was the spark for that?
About 4 years ago, Ray Phillips, Bronx Heroes Comic Con, he asked me to moderate a Women in Comics panel. And I said, really, me? Are you sure? He said, no, yeah, you can do it. I'm like, okay. So I knew a few women, but I actually didn't know a lot. And he actually knew a lot more women than I did at the time. And we gathered about 8 ladies and we had our first panel. And after having that first panel, talking to the women and seeing some of the things that they had gone through and how some of them felt marginalized and some didn't, but also how they really didn't like to come out into the public eye. You know, it was just something that wasn't done because, number one, they weren't thinking about marketing themselves. Number two, sometimes there was bad reactions when they came out in public. And 3, people didn't ask them to do panel discussions. People didn't ask them to talk on podcasts and such. So I took it as an opportunity to say, hey, you know what, why don't we all just band together and let's try to support ourselves. Let's do a couple of panel discussions. So we started doing some more. And then all of a sudden people asked us to do workshops. Then they asked us to do art shows. Then all of a sudden we're going across the country to the San Diego Public Library, to Al Barrio Logan Public Library, and doing a panel discussion about women of color in comics. So now we're just, people email me all the time, and I always say, really, are you sure? I'm like, okay, well, we're coming, you know? So it sort of just flourished from there.
That's actually really incredible. I was talking to a couple people outside about how awe-inspired we are by events and by events like this, because I think people tend to forget that even mega events like San Diego Comic-Con and other shows started as small little shows in the basements of hotels, and then 25, 30 years later exploded into what they are now. My hope is that an event like this will grow much more quickly with much more interest, but we will see. So I have a lot of questions for her. My hope is that you'll feel free to chime in, because they're about the creative process at a mainstream superhero company working for Marvel and DC, particularly for someone like me thinking about representation, again, racial, gender, and sexual identity in publishing houses owned by really large corporations who are more interested in the next crossover in many ways than they are in that representation. But I did want to say one quick thing. It is my experience, having worked for mostly Marvel and DC Comics for the past 25 years, that there really are well-intended people behind the scenes. Often the stumbling blocks to representation are limits in of the creators themselves, of the way we live our lives, of who we know. But often they come from much higher up. Money makers making creative concerns based on, I would say, their own biases, their own concerns about economy, their own ideas of what makes a character good or bad. But it's my experience, particularly in the past 20 years, that there are some really well-intended creators and even higher-ups who are interested in making Marvel and DC Comics particularly a more diverse-looking place and space. There are just some hurdles to climb, which I think are worth climbing, far, higher than us. So, here's my question for you. As you know,
It's not a Phil Jimenez spot
It's so
anymore.
not, but this is, I hope you don't, is this horrible? Do you hate this?
It'll be for part 2.
Right.
Part 2,
And you can ask questions later. I'll wrap this up in a minute. But, so, as you know, I got a big deal assignment at DC, and I was actually very concerned about taking it, because the focus of it's a lead female character, there are going to be a lot of people of color in it, and I'm like, I feel really awkward, because I'm thinking, what better? I went to DC and I was like, well, maybe a woman should write this. And they're like, no, you're great. And so there's this part of me that's thinking, okay, I'm an old school guy, they can sell my name, I have an opportunity to represent, awesome. Also, I need to pay my rent, okay. But what are some things that you think based on what you know about comics, what we've heard today, I should be thinking about when it comes to representation of women in comics. I might not draw the character having her period, but beyond that, what are some things that what are some things you constantly find lacking when it comes to women and the way they're represented in superhero comics?
Just outside of the period.
Outside of the period. I don't have a shaving scene, but not.
Is the reality of being a woman. It's not necessarily saying that you have to go delve into so deep. Sometimes it's just the devil in detail.
Yeah.
It's just the little things. Like I'm tired of the scrunchie being in my hair. I'm pulling out my scrunchie, or I'm walking around the house bummy. Like I'm an actual person. I don't put on false eyelashes every day. I don't do those.
Not even when you fight crime.
No, I'm always wear heels. My feet hurt. I mean, there's just little details that would be just nice. It would make a huge difference.
Okay. Just little details. I'm hoping to incorporate some of them. The trick, of course, is while they're out saving the universe, it can be a bit of an issue with the, worried about like, oh, my heels hurt when they're fighting Galactus. But that said, I will do my best. And particularly women of color. What are some things that you have identified as problems? I was listening to a panel earlier talking about lack of nuance. Like, what's like one thing that you always see that really makes you crazy?
In terms of women of color?
Yeah, as a represented superhero comic.
Well, sometimes non-existence is more.
Right.
Or stereotypes, the sassy black woman. Things like that. There's a little bit of sass, but all women have a little bit of sass. It's in the little delivery.
Right.
So mainly it's the stereotypes.
Okay.
Those stereotypes, please.
So thank you for indulging me. I just think she should be celebrated at least as much as I should be. So if you can give her a big round of applause. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, now I don't feel this. I'm like looking at these questions like, oh my gosh, they really asked them. But honestly, I really geeked out when you said yes to coming here.
Are you serious? I was just like...
And then I was watching all your YouTube videos, like, oh my god, Phil Jimenez is coming here.
I cry. I cry so much it's a cliche, actually.
Yes. Real seriously, I sat there like for about 4 hours watching YouTube videos to make sure I had accurate questions and questions that you haven't been asked before. So, and then all the other ladies were like, oh, this is coming. Like,
well, thank you.
But yeah, this was a little bit about your foray into Wonder Woman. What was your first introduction?
So I don't know if this works. I don't know how you all feel about like your favorite characters. My introduction to Wonder Woman, I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and I saw the Linda Carter TV show. And to my little eyes, that explosion of light, those colors, and that particular woman changed my life forever. I really think it was this mix of appearance, of the tenor of the character on the TV show, and timing. I was at the right age, it was the right look, and it was the shiny, glamorous thing in a world, and I didn't live in a shiny, glamorous world. She also happened to be in comic books and in cartoons, so I could get her in 3 different ways. I really, really think that has a lot to do with it. There are 2 or 3 things. One, her links to Greek mythology. So when I was young, I think a lot of us were into mythology. It was very easy to go to libraries to find work with her in it. I was like, oh my gosh, she's an Amazon, I know what that is. I think that was one thing. As I get older, looking back on it, I think it had a lot to do with being an LGBT kid. And my sense, this gets a little psychotherapy, is that back in the 70s, when I was a child, female characters, particularly on TV, even though a lot of, I know, women really were sort of roll their eyes because they were often crying or damsels in distress, to my eyes, they had a much wider variety and of emotional responses available to them than male characters. I was a gay kid, I was never going to be an alpha male, but in those female characters, I could see strength, I could see sadness, I could see compassion, I could see anger, and with Wonder Woman and the Bionic Woman particularly, I responded to that. They were also the objects of sexual desire by men in a way that there was nothing else, and yet they were also not sexual objects. As portrayed by those actresses, nobody owned them in the way that they own themselves. So I think that ultimately that's what sort of launched me. And then being an LGBT kid and wanting to get out of my house and out of my neighborhood and just go somewhere magical, I felt like Wonder Woman and by extension comic books provided me with a fantastical escape and something to reach for. If I could just draw those comics, if I could just be like those characters, my world would be bigger and more exciting, and I could escape the sort of small place that I had been.
How did you get the opportunity to work on Wonder Woman? I know that must have been a dream project for you.
Right. Which is a warning, getting a dream can be both a dream and a nightmare. It was both the best and worst creative experience that I've ever had. My whole goal in life was to write and draw the Wonder Woman comic. When I was 16, I met then editor Karen Berger, who founded the DC Comics Vertigo imprint, who was editing Wonder Woman. And at some point, I'd worked in a comic book store, and I believe it was Jim Lee, who had just started, told me, listen, dude, the guy that can give you a job in comics, the guy, ironically, is not an artist like me, it's the editor. You have to know the editors. So immediately, I built a relationship with Karen. When I moved to New York City and started attending college there, I literally called her up at DC Comics. She's like, hey, will you look at my portfolio? To this day, she doesn't know why, but she said yes. She saw me in her office, and over a 2-year period, she would give me scripts to work on. This is unheard of now. At the time, this was still possible. Anyway, about 2 years full of rejection later, I submitted a portfolio and was hired 3 weeks after the end of my sophomore year of college. But I didn't draw Wonder Woman for another almost 10 years. I guess I worked in comics for about 8 years. I finally got everyone knew I wanted to work on the book. There was an opening and they slotted me in. And I thought I was going to write this 12-issue series. And it turned out to be, again, both heaven sent and a nightmare from beginning to end. Truth.
Do you have a favorite story? Do you have a favorite story? We're going to jump around with the questions a little bit.
Sure.
We're going to go back. We're going to have part 2 at 4 o'clock.
After the drums. Wait, a favorite story?
Do you have a favorite Wonder Woman story, whether that you produced or someone else produced, or even for the TV show?
So I have a couple. My favorite Wonder Woman story from the TV show is, of course, called The Feminine Mystique, with the Nazis invade Paradise Island, and Drusilla is introduced. Deborah Winger plays Wonder Girl. It is amazing. I showed it to my cousin, my young cousin, because I was like, you gotta watch this. I obviously have really nostalgic feelings for it, but I don't think it's terrible. I mean, I know I mean, it's bad because it's 70s, but, and his only response to it, I was stunned. Costume, he's used to superhero costumes now because of the movies. He watches a lot of genre TV. The only thing he kept saying was, God, it's really slow. Nothing happens, it's really slow. It struck me that the piece that I think is so beautiful, this great 3-act structure, he's just like, come on, speed it up. Anyway, The Feminine Mystique. Probably I have 2 or 3 favorite Perez era stories. One is Wonder Woman 17 through 19, its original Cersei storyline, which I still think is probably one of my favorite Wonder Woman stories of all. There's an amazing story to me where Lois Lane comes to Paradise Island. It's some of the worst art I've ever seen in comics, but that story is one of my favorites. And finally, everyone really seems to like my Day in the Life issue that I wrote with Joe Kelly, where Lois Lane interviews Wonder Woman during a day. And most people think of it, and I say this, I guess there's ego here, it's usually cataloged as like the best single issue of Wonder Woman, because I think it's the most descriptive of her. And I just remember thinking, that was not my intention, I just wanted to write a story about this character as I understood her. So those would be my favorite.
So we're going to come back. The drummers are going to come
The drummers
in,
are here.
And if you want to stick around, we'll stay a couple of minutes with Phil again. Okay, thank you so much.
Wait, is this still okay, by the way? Thank you. Finally, who was here for my first half? Excellent. For those of you who are now here, because of some scheduling stuff, everything got pushed back a little bit. Regine started my interview, and then we cut it in half so that the intermission of performance of the drummer could come on. So I'm just going to... I was just going to try and continue so that whoever's behind me can get on stage. And I thought that the easiest way to do that without a moderator would just be to open the room to questions. That way I'm just not yapping on, and I can answer some of the stuff that is interesting or pertinent to you. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So who has a question? Think about it. I'm gonna go find see if Regine. What? Is she?
She's in a panel. I found her. She's in a different workshop.
Oh.
So when she's done,
She'll swing over here.
she was supposed to bring me my supplies for my workshop.
Oh.
So it's just, we were delayed.
Lots of delay. Yes, my panel technically ended, I think, at 2.
Yeah, my,
So I'm a little behind.
yeah, my panel was at 3:15, 4:15.
Uh-oh. Well, like I said, I won't be here for long, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. And it can be about the industry, it can be about mainstream comics, yes.
So you had mentioned that the way to get into like mainstream is getting to know the editors.
Yes.
And you said that it's changed now, like from when you first started. How would you think you would suggest for someone to go about it now?
So is anyone here interested in writing or drawing comic books for a large publisher? Not necessarily self-publishing. You are sort of? I think the rules are the same. I think the method is different. So the people that can give you a job if you are not self-publishing, are publishers. And the people that tend to hire you are editors. Often that choice is a combined choice between an editor and a publisher. If you are not established, what you need to do is create a relationship with that editor or editors at the comic, and then ask them how they like to receive material. So I'm just speaking for Marvel and DC, what I know so much now about getting work is editors who are overworked and often underpaid are just looking for stuff they think will sell. A publisher will want someone on a particular assignment. Often that's how that happens. But they do go to conventions looking for new talent. I know a lot of editors who secretly would love to use young new people, and so they seek them out. What you should do, figure out, I will say, the book or books you would like to work on. If you really love Green Lantern, if you really love Wonder Woman, if you really love X-Men, find out who's editing those books. Seek them out on social media and create relationships with them. Then the other thing is, tell them who you are and say, I'm really interested in submitting a portfolio. How can I do that? How would you like to see my work? Because a lot of people just send stuff without asking, without making niceties, without being pleasant to the editors. And what you're basically doing is pay me to draw for you, right? That's really what you're saying. I want to work for you. So make it as pleasant as possible. Ask them how they like to receive things, what's better for them, is there a better time to communicate with them. Make sure it's as much about them as it is about you. Most editors now will want to see a website, a DeviantArt page. Some still love good old-fashioned Xeroxes of pages, portfolios, in case you want to know. For most publishers, are 5 to 8 pages of whatever it is you want to do. This is art-wise, so penciling, inking, coloring. They usually like to see their characters represented, but if not, iconic characters help. So characters that are in the mainstream, the Avengers, the X-Men, Superman, Batman, for better or worse, those are characters that people know the world over. And so I would submit a portfolio of characters that are recognizable. And follow up with them. once you've submitted your portfolio, if you haven't heard anything in about 3 weeks or a month, politely follow up. I say I got into business because of polite persistence. When Karen Berger told me, call me in 6 months, I went home and I counted out 6 months on the calendar. And on that Thursday, the 26th, that's what I did. I called her and said, hey, you told me to call in 6 months, and I did. So I truly believe polite persistence, seeking out the editor you want to work for, creating pages for the book that you want to work on, and never giving up are the ways to do it. Also know that larger conventions are more difficult than small ones. So a show like New York Comic Con, do any of you attend that, or have any of you attended that? Is incredibly overwhelming experience for people working it. You know what it's like just to even walk the halls. For most people working it, we barely know what we're doing. We're just trying to get to the next panel. I actually think that is not a great place. If you can travel to smaller shows like Baltimore, you're impressed with the money, obviously, Chicago, anything. Boston is an amazing show. Boston Comic Con, which is coming up in August, it's an amazing show to talk to talent and editors. Those are the places I think you want to go. Anyone else? Yes?
This is completely different from anything you've talked about.
What?
I run a career discussion group.
Uh-huh.
I run a lot of women's events and career events in the store, and I've gotten some pushback from investors and that sort of thing, being like, whoa, we don't want to necessarily do things for your agenda, we want to do what's marketable. I'm assuming you've probably maybe heard something like that in your time, or have you, and how do you do it?
So, I have many answers to that question. I have to say, for various reasons, in business now, very lucky to walk the world as I do, right? So, particularly when it comes to mainstream superhero comics, I look like them. I am different because I'm gay, but I am enough like them where I'm still part of the group, right? Like I'm just on that weird sort of outside in.
They haven't othered you.
What?
They haven't othered you?
They have and I have a little bit. Because I actually believe that things like representation, our politics matter, both in story and out. I certainly could be, I think, part of a inner circle, but I choose not to entirely, because I do think that agenda is legitimate and necessary, right? So, however, that said, I'm still a sucker for mainstream superheroes, if not all the stories they're in. I like them a lot. I see in them great potential. I know how they touched me. So I tend to be a champion of the idea of them, if not the actual content, which I also think helps. I find typically, to this day, which boggles my mind, depending on the company, depending on the editor, if I wanted to write a gay character, it would be under much heavier scrutiny than if a straight person was to do the same, especially a gay male character. That said, outside of comics, I have been courted actively to create gay content. I'm actually really excited about it. In comics, it's sort of like, what are you doing, what are you doing? I think that's also true for people of color, and I've had very interesting discussions with women in comics about not wanting to be known as, they don't want to be known as a woman writer, they just want to be a writer. And part of that comes down to economic concern. Because if they're seen as a woman and they write about womanly things or things that might appeal to women, they're approaching it with agenda, and as opposed to just a good story to tell from a different point of view. It still happens. I still stand by my earlier point that there are, it is my experience, that there are actually really good and thoughtful people behind the scenes in comics. The barrier to entry is often higher than them. So I've heard that. But again, I think because of my appearance, I don't get the heaviest pushback that I could. Also, I think, the end of the day, because I'm a super mainstream artist. I'm not quirky, I'm not fun. I draw like they like. I make them money. So it's another week. So I think they balance me differently than they might someone else. Anyone else? Yes.
What other characters have you wanted to write that you haven't gotten the chance to? And where would you like to see them go?
So I've been doing this probably longer than you've been alive. And the reason I bring that up is because I don't think there's a character I haven't drawn yet. As a matter of fact, there are characters I've drawn that I completely forgot about until someone brings up the back issue. The project I'm working on right now, I'm praying to God comes out in some semblance of what I'm doing, because it will be a way, what I'm excited for is not only characters, some of whom I worked with and some of whom are new to me, and some of whom are new, but it will be a way of telling stories I've never told before in an incredibly mainstream way. So voices I've not used before, character types I've not used before, socio-political point of view, my age and perspective, but in this very sort of traditional, I would say regressively political universe. I'm kind of excited about that. I've drawn almost everybody. Yes? Do I work with the inkers?
Yeah.
I do, although less and less it feels like.
Yeah, it's less and less because they're trying to consolidate more into things.
Because you can digitally ink, and coloring now is ultimately considered almost the more important.
I take some exceptions to that because I'm finding
Oh, I do too.
colors sort of forced now to try different kinds of things like copying and creating the weights and the rest of the stuff that inkers used to do. And now, it's mostly colors and like a lot of really stuff is in terms of like to get it, up and running and get that, seeing that inking makes sense to us. So I'm just curious because I had worked on a lot of it because I do, I'm on DC and of late it has been put to me more and more that editors don't have so much say in it because they get projects that appear and teams appear with the project. So are you better off to try to hook up with pencils at conventions and things like that? So you can try to go in earlier.
If you can become a part of a team, I think that's never unwise, especially if your penciler is in demand. I think folks like, one of the teams that comes to mind instantly is Stuart Immerman and Wade Von Graubacher, who did New X-Men, I think that, Star Wars book. I mean, they're like one of the IT teams at DC. For me, Andy Lanning was my inker for 14 years, I think. He ultimately left to work for like a virtual reality company, like as a sort of creative director. I think because he just wasn't making the money, etc. The question, did anybody hear that question? It was just sort of like, do you all know what an inker does in comics? Who doesn't? You don't know. So in comics, can we close that door?
Oh, anchor?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So I did anchor, and I was like,
We were talking a little bit about the future of inking, and also if inkers should couple with pencilers to get work. And I was just saying that I don't think that's an inherently bad idea, but I think the future of mainstream superhero comics will be much less about inking and much more about digital coloring. Because a lot can be done with digital coloring to hide the flaws of pencils, and pencils can be digitally inked fairly quickly, just with a few adjustments in Photoshop. Sorry about that.
Same thing, but
Yeah.
actually, my Regine, don't mind me, I'm not
Okay. Anyone else? We're talking a lot about process. Is that tedious?
No.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Questions? Yeah? No? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the diversity initiatives in the major companies? I know right now, just thinking about Marvel, how you mentioned before, they're just changing a lot of characters and making them either female, black, or some other race. Besides that, is there anything else going on that they are doing? Probably not for monetary reasons, trying to target niche markets, but do you know of any other initiatives?
I absolutely know of an initiative at Marvel. I feel like most of the successful initiatives are at Marvel. So the sense with diversity is this, right? And this is an interesting, people have different feelings about this. Marvel Comics has currently, thanks to its cinematic universe and 6 years of publishing, probably have 20 incredibly strong brands known worldwide. Spider-Man, Thor, Captain America. So the discussion often comes up, do we make a new character or do we just use existing ones? So when they suddenly make Falcon Captain America, I see two responses. I love it because then they just take one character and put him in a new costume. Not only do you take a character who was once a sidekick and a black sidekick, and then you suddenly make him the premier hero of the Marvel Universe. To me, the story potential of that, if well played, is huge. Also, the visualness of that, for me, can't be understated. I think it's hugely important. When there's a female Thor, and you realize Thor is a title, it's not a name, that anyone worthy can become Thor, I think the metaphoric power of that becomes really important. Also, it's probably easier to take Thor than it would be to create a whole new goddess out of, whole cloth. We've seen with Angela, they bought that character and have been trying for years to sort of make her stick, and she just really hasn't. I even drew that character for a little while. So in terms of diversity, the initiative is, can we create diversity using the brands that exist? Because those are the brands a billion people around the world already know. They're easier to sell. Also, I know of a very direct initiative to get more women on both the creative end, behind the scenes, and in the pages of comics themselves, by women who work at Marvel. Like, that's actually like an imperative, like part of their job description. The resistance you face is, of course, I liken it a little bit to politics of the day. An angry, loud minority of, I would say mostly white guys, who want things to stay the same. And then a whole swath of other people who are like, but we're here and it's not going to change. So then you have companies deciding who to cater to. So to answer your question, my experience, what I know, is there have been literal initiatives in each company. Marvel, I think, is built for it differently, both the DNA of its characters and the makeup of its editorial and marketing staff. The vision of the world itself, the publisher, I think sees the world in a certain way, but I think diversity will always come with a particular brand attached to it. So I think, for example, like, despite the controversy, I love the idea of Miles Morales Spider-Man because suddenly he's 1,000 times more interesting to me than Spider-Man's certainly more interesting to me than Peter Parker, because we know that story, it's done. It's a new kid, new story, new point of view. And probably a lot easier to sell than Arachnid Boy, right? Who brands, I believe, can take up to 10 years to sort of take hold in the public consciousness. And that's, I think, the one interesting factor about adding new faces and new voices to mainstream superhero comics. When the movies, again, reinforce over and over and over Thor, Captain America, Spider-Man, Iron Man, like those are, and Black Widow. Those are the names people know. Now, how do you get new faces attached to the names? How do you feel about that? Do you hate that?
What, the changes?
So do you hate it when, for example, a new character, or actually a pre-existing character, has become Captain America? Meaning, Captain America just didn't wake up one day and he was black. That guy who was Captain America gave up his costume, and somebody else picked it. It's almost like, I don't even know if there's a sports analogy, but when a new player takes up an old number. How do you feel about that?
I have mixed feelings. I feel like it's good for representation, but at the same time it's complicated because I feel like as a person of color, I would like to exist in my own world and have my own representation. So,
like just your own, meaning a new character that is wholly yours, right? I hear this discussion. I've had this discussion so many times, and I have the same mixed feelings. Although for me, as I say, from my privileged standpoint, I am suddenly fascinated how Captain America changes when there's a black man or an Asian person or even a woman under that mask, because I feel like that character particularly, suddenly America, like what does that mean when it's represented by someone who's not white and blonde? Like I think there's power in that, but I could also just be looking for making lemons out of lemonade.
There's also a lot tied to that because if you change the race of the character, but you don't change anything else about the story, is that character actually black? You know?
Well, that's an amazing. See, to me, that's also a really amazing discussion about. I think it was brought up in one of the earlier panels. If you have a black character and introduce them, but then they using black characters specifically, but they do nothing to tackle sort of systemic racism, right? Or who was it? Somebody was saying like why Miles Morales Spider-Man doesn't attack the cops, or why black characters are going to the military-industrial complex, right? Or people trying to jail them. Does it matter, like, that they're there? Are they really a black guy? Or like, I think that's what do you have a feeling about that?
It's all mixed.
It's all mixed, right? It's complicated. Does anyone else have a feeling about that?
Well,
Yeah.
Me?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. At first I was opposed to the idea of a character changing, and I don't mean in terms of using different races or anything, just the idea of that you grew up loving this one
Right.
character and you just associate that identity. But I think it has more to do with, is the story great? Why is there this new character? And that storyline, then that can be interesting. Where, well, like, I would be more restricted, but then maybe I would open up to that idea.
Yeah.
Just because of the story.
Sure. Are we all done?
No.
Oh.
I just came in.
Yeah.
All right, so if you wanted to do the sequential storytelling workshop with Savannah Zambrano, that's me, it's in conference room 1. But you can stay here if you want.
I'll try and wrap up fast so
Or
that you can go join
there.
her.
So whatever you want. Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Thank you for asking. I wish I had a better question. But my experience is that they're real and legitimate like initiatives at Marvel and people who are there supporting the initiatives. DC I think is a little different. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. We got a chair.
What is that?
I'm gonna stand.
chilling.
Yes.
Cool.
How does an initiative turn up in the real world where, you know, like, it sounds great, that's what's going on Marvel, but like, the outsider, how would they know that's or how to be a part of that?
How would they know? I would say, well, I'm a little confused by the question. How would they know that? Like, you mean is there a press release about the initiative?
It sounds like a movement, like an interest of some kind going on in that industry that
I didn't say industry. I said a company.
in the company, but the outsider was like, hey, I tried comics on the side. I wouldn't imagine an initiative was occurring. How would they find out about it?
I remain confused by the question. What you mean? The internal workings of the initiative, or the results? I'm not sure why they should know. And I mean that not that it's not good PR. I'm just saying like there are lots of initiatives behind the scenes. I'm not sure people reading comics know about. So I'm not sure what the mechanics of disseminating that information would be. I guess I'm still slightly confused about the question.
It just sounds all wonderful, like, oh, they're concerned, they have initiatives in the workplace in Marvel. The outsider in the real world, who they don't tend to like engage or interact with.
Sure.
How would they know, oh, Marvel's really interested in this type of genre? Like, it always comes across abstract, like a great idea, but linking the two realities, that's always like in the elusive.
Okay, you mean you're talking about in terms of certain initiatives that the mainstream is supposedly doing in terms of what, diversity?
Yeah.
And then how are we as creatives, how are we going to know about those initiatives?
You mean how do they seek out people to
Yeah.
diversify them? Oh, that makes sense. All I know is that the two women in charge of who were in charge of being more women in comics were actively looking at portfolios submitted to them, seeking out creators who were women, who identified as women in their work. When they traveled to conventions, they were seeking primarily women, as well as others, obviously. So you had two women in a sort of male-dominated group, but who are actively looking at portfolios and submissions and seeking out female creators in convention settings to add to their ranks. And then when it comes to, I think partly I'm flummoxed because I know of these initiatives, I don't know how they work, I know who's involved in them, I see them reflected in the content by, again, trying within the space of their brands to rethink their characters in all these different ways. Wolverine, that name is now attached to a woman, Thor's a woman, Black Captain America, et cetera, like within the confines of their brand, they're just putting different people in the suits to see like what happens and what stories they get out of it. When it comes to actual creators, is that who you're talking about? Like how do creators
Find out about it?
find out about it? Yeah.
A convention setting.
I would, well, I'm just not sure what answer I'm supposed to give you because I don't know how anyone finds out about them. Like, I'm a little lost. Obviously you're sitting there and you're kind of like, and I feel like you're trying to trick me and I'm not exactly sure what answer I should be giving you.
No tricks. It was a direct inquiry based on, hey, they're concerned and creating these things.
But I'm sad that you choose to dismiss that, basically because it's not untrue. It doesn't mean that there aren't corporate obstacles, but to imagine that there's an entire staff of people, or people on that staff who are not at least thinking about it, it feels unfair and dismiss it.
Not dismissive, it was an inquiry.
Okay, I apologize.
Well, do you want to know, you're trying to find out how you can find out about these initiatives so you can possibly pass on the information to somebody?
Yeah, that's what.
That would help.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, so you want to pass the information on to someone else.
Yeah.
So you want to find out how either you or someone you know can get in touch with said people. Well, you named some editors, correct?
The first person I would check out is Sana Amanat, who is, I believe, a VP of character creation
At Marvel,
At
yes.
Marvel, and was one of the editors responsible for the creation and proliferation of Miss Marvel.
Yes.
So for her, I know it's incredibly important, and she's super cool. Like that actually helps immensely.
What's your name again?
My name's Phil Jimenez.
Her name.
Sana Amanat. Tell her I said hello.
Thanks for helping me unravel that inquiry.
So welcome.
Yes, sir.
In terms of venues, in terms of finding out when these initiatives are announced, what would you suggest in terms of publications, in terms of venues in general, in the industry, as an independent artist?
Venues to seek out work?
To find where you can send your stuff, or
So the easiest way, if you're going, so as I was saying earlier, if you were interested in working for a mainstream superhero company, if you want to draw or write superhero stories for them, the easiest thing to do is seek out the editor, and every book has an editor credited in its front piece, of the book that you're interested in writing or drawing for. I am of the belief, and as I've been told, it's much easier to narrow the focus. So if you're interested in writing Wolverine or the X-Men, find out who edits that. So in this case, it would be a guy named Daniel Ketchum, and then email them and say, I'm an artist, and it's always in the affirmative, not I'm an aspiring. Like, I'm an artist. I'm really interested in submitting portfolio pieces. How do you prefer that? I would love to show off some of my work for you. And then see if they respond. Most editors, I find, it can take 2 or 3 emails. And once they tell you how to submit your portfolio, then just follow the rules. And like I said, most portfolios are 5 to 8 pages, pencil pages featuring iconic characters, showcasing storytelling skills, like panel storytelling skills, and then ask if they want a DeviantArt page or a website or whatever. But the easiest way to do it, if you're not communicating at them directly, and I would say that, as I say, mid-sized conventions are a great place to talk to editors. Larger conventions are very difficult. But seek out the editor on the book that you're interested in working for. What's very difficult are people that say, I just want to work in comics. We all want that, right? Like a lot of people would like that. What would you like to do in comics? I think specificity is key. Say, I'm really, really interested in working on this particular book. I would love to write Batman and Robin or work in the Batman universe. Then seek out those professionals, those editors who edit that book, find out how they want. Also, it's a great way to see what they are putting out at that moment, to see what sort of art can work, and what the aesthetic of the editor in charge. But definitely seek out the editor on the book that you're interested in working on. Yes. Yes.
Angela, Asgard's Assassin, is amazing, and
Thank you.
Sarah, the character you co-created, is the first female superhero character I've ever identified with in my whole entire superhero reading life, which is terrifying. I'm 36, I've been reading comics since I was in junior high. So thank you for finally doing that. And one of
That was Marguerite, by the way.
Yes, but you're part of the visual representation. And one of the pieces that's so great about her is she isn't a generic looking woman. She is dark skin. I mean, I don't, but like that wasn't even it. Like she has dark skin and she has a specific sort of, beakish nose, and she's like thick through the middle. And like nobody has done that with a superhero character before. And one of the things you had asked in the part one was, what are the things that women are seeing in comics that they don't see? And like, I don't see body shape diversity ever. And so it was super exciting to see that in her. And I guess I was curious about like what the process was of developing this superhero character who was diverse in these different ways. And like, how were you part of that as an artist? Yeah.
So when Sarah came up, it was decided, I think, fairly early on that she would be an M to F trans. Of course, she's an angel, which brings up other interesting discussions. But assuming that, I wanted three things. So we definitely wanted a person of color. I wanted a different body shape. And I ended up talking to several trans friends about how to, in contour line, make sort of obvious, kind of obvious, the trappings of this character without falling into stereotype, and they were incredibly helpful. It was actually at an LGBT academic conference on a panel about just that discussion, and I just sort of took copious notes. So part of it was just being interested in showcasing a character like that, drawing armor that actually, would work. Like Angela was a character I had a very hard time getting into because she's an incredibly internal character, and also she wears a space bikini, so it's like. And it's funny, I think a lot of editors think that because I once drew Wonder Woman, that's like, in my head, that's a particularly unique character. Like, I don't expect to draw all barbarian women in space bikinis. That's not a thing. But in this case, I wanted something that was almost exactly directly opposite. And a human character, like Angela was very hard for me because there wasn't much that was human to me about her. Sarah, I got into her head instantly. She was easy to draw, she was fun to draw. And I think that also has a lot to do with Marguerite and Kieran, like giving her a bit of a spirit that the other character didn't have. But it was reaching out to people who I thought could help me visually. And then just wanting something exactly the opposite. And I'm really just making sure that we were all on the same page. Because the nice thing is, they say, like, we knew that we were going to try to create this character, and we just wanted to do it in a way that was as respectful as possible.
Did you have to write to the colorist, like, she is brown, you need to make sure she's brown?
Of course.
Yeah, like, you probably might not be able to say anything about this, but like in the most recent iteration, they had turned her skin like barely darker than mine.
Oh, is that true?
Yes, and they made her like, and it was finally addressed in the text of the comics, like, oh, she lost all this weight because she was trapped in hell. Doesn't explain why she was.
Is that true?
Yes. Does not explain why she is super pale. That was also said that they would fix that in trade. But like, I'm curious about like how, you're someone with a long, like you probably have a lot more freedom as an artist than like newbie people are. So like, our editor, and we know the stories from like Ron Wimberly about like the editor telling him to make the character lighter skinned and him being like, this character's black. Like that stuff is so easy to get lost and changed after someone with your like prestige is like not in that position.
Yes. I mean, that's the other thing I come to. I've been doing it for so long that I can, although even still, I get limits too, and I want to push things. So like, no, absolutely not. No. I just found out that a character that I really wanted to make not white was like absolutely not, because they're feeling sort of too many not white characters, that kind of thing.
Because you know if you have too many, because you know if you have more than 2 black people,
I know.
it becomes it's a black comic. It's the black agenda.
So that definitely you definitely
It's
get
all
pushback
so
on
black.
that. I didn't know about that the Queen of Hell stuff. Because I left that project a long time ago, so I'm sorry to hear about
The writing is amazing still, and I did it all.
She's incredible.
Oh my God.
She's really, really good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
But that just killed me, so.
I'm sorry.
We can take one more question.
No.
Any more questions?
You're all done.
Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank Regine.
Thank